cars are fast. I never really knew this. Back home, before Marshmallow went away, she used to run down into the street barking at cars, and they usually stopped, or at least slowed down enough that she could catch them, though all she ever did at that point was veer off and pretend she never wanted to attack them in the first place. As I ran after the boy's car, I had the sense that it was pulling farther and farther away from me. The scent of dust and exhaust grew thin and tenuous, but I picked up a clear sign of a right turn where the road became pavement, though after that I wasn't sure I could smell him at all. But I couldn't give up. I turned myself over to the mindless panic and continued my pursuit. Ahead of me I heard the loud rumble of a train, clanking and shaking, and when I topped a rise and saw it, I finally caught a whiff of the boy. His car, windows down, was parked on the road at the train crossing. I was exhausted. I had never run so far or so fast in my life, but I ran harder still when the side door opened and the boy stood up. "Oh, Bailey," he said. While every part of me wanted to tackle him and be loved, I wasn't going to miss my chance, and I veered from him at the last second and bounded into the car. "Bailey!" Mom laughed. I licked them both, forgiving them for forgetting me. After the train passed, Mom started the car and turned it around, then stopped because Grandpa showed up in his truck. Maybe he was coming home with us this time. "Like a rocket," Grandpa said. "Hard to believe he got this far." "How long would you have gone, huh, Bailey? Oh, you doodle dog," Ethan told me affectionately. It was with great suspicion that I jumped into Grandpa's truck, though. Suspicion that proved justified because while Ethan and Mom drove on, Grandpa turned around and took me back to the farm. Mostly I liked Grandpa. From time to time he'd do chores, which meant we'd go into the new barn toward the back, where soft hay was piled, and take a nap. During cold days, Grandpa had a couple of heavy blankets he'd wrap around us. But the first few days after the boy left, I sulked in Grandpa's presence, punishing him for bringing me back to the farm. When that didn't work, all I could think to do was chew up a pair of Grandma's shoes. But that still didn't bring the boy back. I just couldn't get past the utter betrayal of it all. I knew that out there somewhere, probably back home, the boy needed me, didn't understand where I was. Everyone was infuriatingly calm, seemingly oblivious to the catastrophic change that had struck the household. I became so frantic, I even dug into the boy's closet and brought out the flip, running down and tossing it into Grandma's lap. "What in the world is this?" she exclaimed. "It's Ethan's big invention," Grandpa said. I barked. "Yes, Ethan!" "You want to go outside and play, Bailey?" Grandma asked me. "Why don't you take him for a walk?" "Walk? Walk to see the boy?" "I thought I'd watch a little of the game here," Grandpa replied. "For heaven's sake," Grandma said. She went to the door and tossed the flip out in the yard, barely sending the thing 5 yards. I bounded over, grabbed it, and then stared in absolute non-comprehension when she shut the door, leaving me outside. Well, okay then. I spat out the flip and trotted past Flair, heading down the driveway. I went over to the girls' house, which I had already done several times since Ethan left. I could smell her scent everywhere, but the boy's scent was gradually fading away. A car pulled into her driveway and Hannah jumped out. "Bye," she said. She turned and looked at me. "Well, hi, Bailey." I ran up to her, wagging. I could smell several other people's scents in her clothes, but there was no sign of Ethan. Hannah did go for a walk with me back home, and when she knocked on the door, Grandma let her in and fed some pie to her, but not to me. I often dreamed of the boy. I dreamed of him jumping into the pond, with me swimming down and down to play rescue. I dreamed of him doing the go-kart, how happy and excited he was. And sometimes I dreamed of him jumping out of the window, the sharp crack of pain rising in a shout from his lips as he fell in the flaming bushes. I hated those dreams, and I was just awakening from one of them one night when I saw the boy standing above me. "Hi, Bailey," he whispered, his scent flowing off of him. He was back on the farm. I jumped to my feet, putting my paws on his chest to lick his face. "Shh," he told me. "It's late. I just got here. Everybody's sleeping." It was happy Thanksgiving time, and life was back to normal. Mom was there, but not Dad. Hannah came over every day. The boy seemed happy, but I could also feel that he was distracted. He spent a lot of time looking at papers instead of playing with me, even when I brought him the stupid flip to try to shake him out of it. I wasn't surprised when he left again. This was my new life, I realized. I lived on the farm with Grandpa and Grandma, and Ethan only came home for visits. It wasn't what I wanted, but as long as the boy always returned, I had an easier time seeing him leave. It was on one of his visits, when the air was warm and leaves were freshly out, that Ethan and I went to see Hannah running around in a big yard. I could smell her, as well as other boys and girls, because the wind flowed off the yard and their bodies were sweating as they ran. It looked like fun, but I stayed by Ethan's side, because it seemed that while we stood there, the ache in his leg became more pronounced, spreading through his body. Odd, dark emotions swirled inside him as he watched her and the others run. "Hey!" Hannah came over to see us. I licked her leg, which was salty with sweat. "What a nice surprise!" "Hi, Bailey," she said. "Hi." "My times are really coming down in the 400, the girl said. "Who is that guy?" Ethan asked. "Oh? Who? What do you mean?" "That guy you were talking to and hugging. You two seemed really friendly," Ethan said. His voice sounded strained. I glanced around but couldn't see any danger. "He's just a friend, Ethan," the girl said sharply. The way she spoke his name, it sounded like the boy had been bad. "Is it that guy? What's his name? Brett? He's certainly fast on his feet." Ethan stabbed at the ground with his cane, and I sniffed at the tuft of earth that he overturned. "Well, what is that supposed to mean?" Hannah asked, her hands on her hips. "Go on back. Your track coach is looking over here," Ethan said. Hannah looked over her shoulder, then back at Ethan. I do need to get back," she said uncertainly. "Fine," Ethan said. He turned and limped away. "Ethan!" Hannah called. I looked at her, but the boy just kept walking. The dark, confused mixture of sadness and anger was still there. Something about the place apparently made Ethan feel bad, because we never went back. That summer brought some big changes. Mom came to the farm, and this time a truck followed her up the driveway, and men unloaded some boxes and carried them up to her bedroom. Grandma and Mom spent a lot of time talking quietly to each other, and sometimes Mom would cry, which made Grandpa uncomfortable, so he'd go out to do chores. Ethan had to leave all the time to go to work, which was just like school in that I couldn't go with him. But when he came home, he smelled deliciously of meats and grease. It reminded me of the time after Flair abandoned us in the woods that Grandpa fed me food out of a bag in the front seat of the truck. The biggest change in our lives, though, was that the girl no longer came around to see us. Sometimes the boy would take me for a car ride, and as we passed her house, I would smell Hannah, so I knew she was still around. But the boy never stopped or turned in her driveway. I found that I missed her. She loved me and smelled wonderful. The boy missed her, too. When we drove past Hannah's house, he always stared out the side window, always slowed down a little, and I could feel his yearning. I didn't understand why we couldn't just drive up to her house and see if she had any biscuits, but we never did. That summer, Mom went down to the pond and sat on the dock and was very sad. I tried to make her feel better by barking at the ducks, but she could not be cheered up. Finally, she pulled something off her finger. It wasn't food and was made of metal, a small round thing that she threw into the water, where it slipped beneath the surface with a tiny plop. I wondered if she wanted me to go after it and gazed up at her, ready to give it a shot, even though I knew it was hopeless. But she just told me to come, and the two of us went back to the house. After that summer, life settled into a comfortable pattern. Mom started doing work too and came home smelling of fragrant and sweet oils. Sometimes I would go with her past the goat ranch and over the rumbling bridge, and we would spend the day in a big room full of clothes and stinky wax candles and uninteresting metal objects, and people would come in to see me, and sometimes they would leave with items and bags. The boy came and went for a happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas and spring break and summer vacation. I pretty much had gotten over my resentment toward Flair, who didn't do anything anymore but stand and stare into the wind all day, when Grandpa showed up with a creature who moved like a baby horse and smelled unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. His name was Jasper the Donkey. Grandpa liked to laugh as he watched Jasper skip around in the yard, and Grandma would say, "I don't know why you think we need a donkey," and go back inside. Jasper was not at all afraid of me, despite my position as top predator on the farm. I played with him a little, but it seemed as if I was so easily tired all the time, it just wasn't worth investing myself in a creature who didn't know how to pick up a ball. One day a man named Rick came to dinner. The feeling from Mom was happy and embarrassed, and from Grandpa it was suspicious, and from Grandma it was ecstatic. Rick and Mom sat on the porch, just like Hannah and Ethan used to do, but they didn't wrestle. After that, though, I started seeing more and more of Rick, who was a big man with hands that smelled of wood. He would throw the ball for me more than anybody, so I liked him a lot, though not as much as the boy. My favorite time of day was when Grandpa did chores. Sometimes, when he didn't do chores, I would go and take a nap in the barn just the same. I was taking a lot of naps and no longer had any interest in going out on long adventures. When Mom and Rick took me for a walk, I was always exhausted when we got back. About the only thing that could make me excited was when the boy would come to the farm for a visit. I'd still dance and wiggle and whimper, and I would play at the pond or walk in the woods or do anything else he wanted, even chase the flip, though the boy thankfully seemed to have forgotten where it was. Sometimes we went to town to the dog park, and while I was always glad to see the other dogs, I thought the younger ones were juvenile with their relentless playing and wrestling. Then one evening, the oddest thing happened. Grandpa set dinner down before me, and I didn't feel like eating. My mouth filled with drool, and I drank some water and went back to lie down. Soon a thick, heavy pain came through my body, leaving me panting for breath. I lay there all night on the floor by my food bowl. The next morning, Grandma saw me and called to Grandpa. "There's something wrong with Bailey," she said. I could hear the alarm in her voice when she said my name and wagged my tail so she'd know I was okay. Grandpa came and touched me. "You okay, Bailey? What's wrong?" After some conversation, Mom and Grandpa carried me to the truck, and we went to the clean, cool room with a nice man, the same nice man we had been visiting more and more often in recent years. He felt me all over, and I wagged a little, but I didn't feel very well, and didn't try to sit up. Mom came in, and she was crying, and Grandma and Grandpa were there, and even Rick came. I tried to let them know I appreciated all of their attention, but the pain was worse, and it was all I could do to roll my eyes to look at them. Then the nice man brought out a needle. I smelled a sharp and familiar smell and felt a tiny jab. After a few minutes, my pain felt a lot better, but now I was so sleepy I just wanted to lie there and do chores. My last thoughts, as I drifted off, were, as always, of the boy. When I woke up, I knew I was dying. There was a sense within me of a rising darkness. And I had faced this before when I was named Toby and was in a small hot room with Spike and some other barking dogs. I hadn't given it any thought at all, though I suppose deep down I knew that one day I would wind up like Smokey the cat. I remembered the boy crying the day they buried Smokey in the yard, and I hoped he wouldn't cry over my death. My purpose, my whole life, had been to love him and be with him, to make him happy. I didn't want to cause him any unhappiness now. In that way, I decided it was probably better that he wasn't here to see this. Though I missed him so much at that moment, the ache of it was as bad as the strange pains in my belly. The nice man came into the room. "You awake, Bailey? You awake, fella?" Poor fella. "My name," I wanted to say, "is not Fella." The nice man leaned over me. "You can let go, Bailey. You did a good job. You took care of the boy. That was your job, Bailey, and you did a good job. You are a good dog. A good dog." I had the sense that the nice man was talking about death. There was a feeling of kind finality and peace emanating from him. Then Mom and Grandma and Grandpa and Rick all came in, and they hugged me and said they loved me and told me I was a good dog. Yet from Mom I felt a tension, a sure sense of something, not danger exactly, but something I needed to protect her from. I gave her hand a feeble lick, and as the darkness came from within me, I pushed back against it. I had to stay alert. Mom needed me. The tension seemed to rise after another hour went by. First, Grandpa joining in Mom's mood, then Grandma, and then even Rick, so that just as I felt myself flagging, a new resolve to protect my family from this unknown threat would renew my strength. And then I heard the boy. "Bailey!" he shouted. He burst into the room, and the tension left everyone at once. This, I realized, was what they had been waiting for. Somehow they had known the boy was coming. The boy buried his face in my neck and sobbed. It took everything I had to lift my head up and lick him, to let him know it was all right. I wasn't afraid. My breathing turned raspy, and everyone remained with me, holding me. It felt wonderful to receive so much attention, but then a shudder of pain shot through my stomach so sharp I couldn't help but cry out loud. The nice man came in then, and he had another needle. "We need to do this now. Bailey shouldn't have to suffer." "Okay," the boy said, crying. I tried to wag my tail at the sound of my name, but I found I couldn't manage even a twitch. There was another jab in my neck. "Bailey, Bailey, Bailey, I'm gonna miss you, Doodle Dog," Ethan whispered in my ear. His breath was warm and delightful. I closed my eyes at the pleasure of it, the sheer pleasure of love from the boy, love by the boy. And then, just like that, the pain was gone. In fact, I felt like a puppy again, full of life and joy. I remembered feeling like this the first time I ever saw the boy, coming out of his house and running to me with his arms open wide. That made me think of diving after the boy during rescue. The fading light as I dove deeper, the way the thick water pushed against my body, just like now. I could no longer feel the boy's hands touching me. I could just feel the water on all sides, warm and gentle and dark. 18. Awareness came long after I'd come to recognize my mother's smell and learned how to fight my way to her teat for nourishment. My eyes were open, and my vision was starting to sharpen well enough for me to see my mother's dark brown face the day I understood, with a jolt, that I was a puppy again. No, that wasn't quite it. It was more that I was a puppy who suddenly remembered being me again. I had this sense of drifting in my sleep, aware of nothing but the long, long passage of time, not dreaming, not even thinking, and then, in a blink, I was looking at the world through the eyes of a very young dog. Yet somehow I remembered being this same puppy since birth, scrambling for my mother's milk without any awareness of my previous lives. Now that I remembered everything that had come before, I was truly puzzled. I'd felt so complete, there just didn't seem to be any reason for me to go on. How could I possibly have a more important mission than loving the boy? I missed Ethan so much I sometimes whimpered, which my new siblings always mistook for a weakness and jumped on me with the intent to dominate. There were 7 of them, all dark brown with black markings, and I was impatient with the idea that they didn't recognize who was going to be in charge here. A woman took care of us most of the time, though there was a man who often came down into the basement to feed us, and it was he who carried us in a box to the backyard when we were a few weeks old. A male dog in a cage sniffed at us when we all ran over to see him, and I understood instinctively that this was our father. I'd never met a father before, and was curious as to what he was doing there. "He seems fine with them," the man said to the woman. "You going to be okay, Bernie? You want to come out?" The woman opened Father's cage. His name was obviously Bernie, and the male dog bounded out, sniffed at us, and then went over to pee on the fence. We all galloped after him, falling on our faces because our puppy legs could barely move. Bernie put his face down, and one of my brothers jumped up and disrespectfully bit at his ears. But Bernie didn't seem to mind. He even played with us a little, knocking us around before trotting over to the back door to be let in. A few weeks later, I was in the yard, showing one of my brothers who was boss, when I stopped and squatted and all at once realized I was a female. I sniffed in amazement at my urine, snarling a warning when my brother took an opportunity to barrel into me. What would Ethan think? How could I, Bailey, be a girl dog? Except I wasn't Bailey. One day, a man came and played with us in an unusual fashion. He clapped his hands, and the puppies who didn't cower from the noise, I was one of these, he put into a box. Then, one at a time, he took those of us in the box out into the yard. When it was my turn, he turned and walked away from me as if he had forgotten I was there, so I followed. He told me I was a good dog just for doing that. This guy was a pushover. He was about the age that Mom had been the day she broke the car window and gave me some water, the first day I ever saw the boy. The man put me inside a T-shirt and then spoke to me, calling me, "Hey girl, can you find your way out?" I figured he had changed his mind about wanting me bagged up inside the shirt, so I jumped out and ran over to him again for more praise. The woman had come out into the yard to watch. "Most of them take a minute to figure it out, but this one's pretty bright," the man remarked. He flipped me over on my back, and I squirmed with it, playing, thinking to myself that it was unfair since he was so much bigger than I was. "She doesn't like that, Jacob," the woman observed. None of them like it. The question is, will she stop struggling and let me be the boss, or will she keep fighting? I gotta have a dog that knows I'm the boss," the man said. I heard the word dog, and it didn't sound angry. I wasn't being punished, but I was being pinned down. I figured I didn't know what sort of game we were playing now, so I just relaxed without struggle. "Good girl," he said again. Then he took a ball of paper and showed it to me, waving it around until I became absolutely tantalized. I felt stupid and uncoordinated trying to get a bite of the thing with my little puppy mouth when it was right there in front of me, but I couldn't move my head fast enough. Then he tossed it a few feet away, so I ran over and pounced on it. Aha! Try to get it now. Then I remembered Ethan and the stupid flip, how happy it made him when I brought the thing back to him. I turned around and trotted back to the man, dropping the ball at his feet and sitting for him to throw it again. "This one," the man said to the woman. "I'll take this one." I whimpered when I saw the kind of car ride I was going to be taking, in the back of a truck, locked in a cage very similar to the one that had taken me to the hot, noisy room with Spike. I was a front seat dog. Anyone could tell that. My new home reminded me of the apartment where we went to live after the fire. It was small, with a balcony over a parking lot, but it was down the street from a nice park where the man took me several times a day. I knew I was far away from Ethan by the smell of the trees and bushes. This wasn't a wet place like the farm, with frequent rain, though it was lush with flowers and shrubbery. The air was tinged with a strong smell of automobiles, which I could hear driving in the near and far distance every single hour of the day. Sometimes a hot, dry wind blew in, reminding me of the yard, but other days the air was thick with moisture, which never happened when I was Toby. The man's name was Jacob, and he named me Alea. "It's Swedish for moose. You're not a German shepherd, you're a Swedish shepherd now." I wagged in non-comprehension. "Alea, Alea, come, Ellie, come." His hands smelled of oil and his car and of papers and people. Jacob wore dark clothes and wore metal objects on his belt, including a gun, so I figured he was a policeman. When he was gone during the day, a nice woman named Georgia came over every few hours to play with me and take me for a walk. She reminded me of Chelsea, who had lived down the street from Ethan and me and had a dog named Marshmallow, and then later Duchess. Georgia had all sorts of names for me, some of them really silly, like Ellie Welly Cuddle Coo. It was sort of like being called a doodle dog. It was my name, but different, delivered with an extra dose of affection. I was doing my best to adjust to this new life as Ellie, so different from my life as Bailey. Jacob gave me a dog bed, very similar to the one I'd been given in the garage, but this time I was expected to sleep in it. Jacob pushed me away when I tried to crawl under the covers with him, even though I could see he had plenty of room. I understood that what was expected of me was to live with the new rules, the way I'd learned to live with Ethan going to do college. The sharp pain I felt when I thought about how much I missed the boy was just something to get used to. A dog's job was to do what people wanted. There was, though, a difference between obeying commands and having a purpose, a reason for being. I thought my purpose was to be with Ethan, and that I had fulfilled that purpose, being by his side as he grew up. If that was the case, why was I now Ellie? Could a dog have more than one purpose? Jacob treated me with a calm patience. When my little bladder suddenly signaled and let go all in the same rush, he never yelled and ran me out the door like the boy used to. He just gave me such praise for when I went outside that I resolved to get my body under control as soon as I could manage. But Jacob didn't gush affection the way the boy did. Jacob focused on me in the businesslike fashion Ethan focused on Flair, the horse, and to an extent I liked the sense of direction it gave me. Though there were other times I pined for the feel of the boy's hands on my fur, and couldn't wait for Georgia to come over and call me Ellie Welly Cuddle Coo. There was, I came to feel, something broken inside Jacob. I didn't know what it was, but I could sense something drawing energy from his emotions, a dark bitterness that seemed to me very similar to what I felt inside Ethan when he first came home after the fire. Whatever it was, it kept Jacob's feelings toward me in check. Whenever he and I did something together, I could feel him evaluating me with cool eyes. "Let's go to work," Jacob would say, and he would load me in the truck and off we'd go to a park for games. I learned drop, which meant to lie down, and I learned that to Jacob, stay really meant stay, and I was expected to remain in the same spot until he told me, come. The training helped me keep my mind off Ethan. At night, though, I often fell asleep, thinking of the boy. I thought of his hands in my fur, the smell of him as he slept, his laugh and his voice. Wherever he was, whatever he was doing, I hoped he was happy. I knew I would never see him again. Georgia started coming over less often as I got older, but I found that I didn't miss her as I became more and more immersed in our work. One day we went to some woods and met a man named Wally, who petted me and then ran away. "What's he doing, Ellie? Where's he going?" Jacob asked me. I watched Wally, who was looking over his shoulder at me, waving excitedly. "Find him! Find!" Jacob told me. Uncertainly, I started trotting off after Wally. What was this? Wally saw me coming after him and dropped to his knees, clapping, and when I caught up to him, he showed me a stick, and we played with it for a few minutes. Then Wally stood up. "Look, Ellie, what's he doing? Find him," Wally said. Jacob was strolling off, and I ran after him. "Good dog," Jacob praised. As intelligent games go, I'd probably put it right up there with chasing the flip, but Wally and Jacob seemed to enjoy it, so I went along with it, especially since afterward we got to play tug on a stick, which in my mind beat Find Wally hands down. It was around the time I started learning Find that a strange sensation gripped me. A restless anxiousness accompanied by an embarrassing odor from my rear end. Mom and Grandma used to complain any time I released fragrant gases from under my tail, so when I started discharging this smell, I knew I was a bad dog. Grandpa was so offended by bad odors that he'd say, "Oh, Bailey," even when the smell came from him. Jacob didn't notice the odor, but he did register alarm at all the dogs lifting their legs on the bushes around the apartment, dogs I knew instinctively were milling around because of me. Jacob's reaction was most curious. He put me into a pair of shorts, like the ones he wore under his pants, my tail sticking out of a hole in the back. I'd always felt sorry for dogs who wore sweaters and other clothes, and here I was playing dress-up in front of all those male dogs. It was more than a little embarrassing, especially given that there was something compelling about the attention I was being shown by the motley pack of males who were so busy wetting the shrubbery outside my home. Jacob said, "Time to see the vet," and took me for a car ride to a place that was very familiar, a cool room with bright lights and a metal table. I fell asleep, and predictably was wearing a stupid cone-shaped collar when I awoke back home. As soon as the cone came off, Jacob and I were back at the park almost every day for the next several months. The days grew shorter, though it never got cold or came close to snowing, and finding Wally became harder and harder because they kept changing the rules on me. Sometimes Wally wouldn't even be there when we arrived, and I'd have to go find him where he'd wandered off to. He'd be lying around like Grandpa doing chores, and I learned another command, "Show me," which meant leading Jacob back to where I'd come across Wally's lazy body sprawled under a tree. Somehow Jacob could tell when I had found something, even when it was just one of Wally's socks left on the ground. The man was a disaster, always dropping his clothing for us to find and pick up. Jacob would read my look when I came running back to him. "Show me," he'd say, but only when I had something to show. We did other work, too. Jacob taught me how to climb up a slide and to ease myself down the ladder on the other side, making me do it a step at a time instead of just jumping from the top as I preferred. He taught me to crawl into tight tubes and to leap up on a stack of logs, and one day he had me sit while he removed the gun from his side and shot off some explosions that made me flinch the first couple of times. "Good girl, Ellie. This is a gun. See? No reason to be afraid. It makes a loud noise, but you're not afraid, are you, girl?" I sniffed at it when he held it out to me and was very glad when he didn't try to make me fetch it. The thing smelled bad and looked like it would fly worse than the flip. Sometimes Jacob would sit at an outside table with other people with guns and drink from bottles. It was at times like these that his internal turmoil was most evident to me. The people at the table would laugh, and sometimes Jacob would join in, and other times he'd turn inward, dark and sad and alone. Isn't that right, Jacob? One of the men said one time. I heard the name, but Jacob was staring off into space, not paying attention. I sat up and nuzzled his hand, but when he petted me, I sensed he didn't really register that I was there. I said, isn't that right, Jacob? Jacob turned and looked at everyone watching him, and I sensed he felt embarrassed. What? If Y2K is as bad as they say it's going to be, we're going to need every K9 unit we can get. Be like Rodney King all over again. Ellie's not that kind of dog, Jacob said coldly. I straightened at the sound of my name, conscious as I did so that all the men at the table were looking at me. I felt uneasy for some reason, just as some of the men seemed uncomfortable with Jacob's stare. When they started talking again, it was to each other, ignoring Jacob. I nuzzled his hand once more, and this time he responded by scratching my ears. Good dog, Ellie, he said. Find Wally evolved into just find. Jacob and I would go somewhere, and sometimes I'd be given something to sniff, an old coat or a shoe or a glove, and I'd have to find the person who belonged to the item. Other times, there'd be nothing to sniff, and I'd horse back and forth over a huge area, alerting any time I picked up the scent of something interesting. I found a lot of people who weren't Wally, and sometimes they were obviously not informed of the game and would call, "Here, boy," or otherwise react to me when they saw me. I'd always show Jacob these people, and he always praised me, even if the people I'd found weren't bright enough to know what was going on. The point, I realized, was to find people and to take Jacob to them and let Jacob decide if they were the right people or not. That was my job. I had been with Jacob for about a year when he started taking me to his work every day. A lot of people dressed like Jacob, milled around, and were mostly friendly to me, though they drew back respectfully when Jacob told me to heel. He took me to a kennel and back with two other dogs, Cammy and Gypsy. Cammy was jet black and Gypsy was brown. Despite the fact that we were all caged together, my relationship with Cammy and Gypsy was different than I'd ever had with other canines. We were working dogs and didn't feel free to play much because we always needed to be ready to serve our masters. Most of the time, we just alertly sat at the fence. Gypsy worked with a policeman named Paul and was gone a lot. And sometimes I watched Paul and Gypsy work in the yard. They did it all wrong. Gypsy would just smell in between boxes and piles of clothing and would alert for no reason, though Paul always praised her anyway, pulling out a package from the items and telling Gypsy she was a good dog. Cammy was older and didn't bother to watch Gypsy, probably feeling embarrassed for the poor dog. Cammy worked with a policewoman named Amy and didn't go out much. When he did, though, he went out fast. Amy would come get him and they'd leave at a run. I never knew what Cammy's work was, but I suspected it wasn't as important as find. Where are you working this week? Amy asked Paul once. Back out at the airport until Garcia comes off sick leave, Paul told her. How's life on the bomb squad? Quiet. I'm worried about Cammy, though. His scores have been a little off. I'm wondering if his nose is going. At the sound of his name, Cammy raised his head, and I looked over at him. He's what, 10 years old now? Paul asked. About that, Amy said. I stood up and shook myself off because I could sense Jacob coming, and a few seconds later he walked around the corner. He and his friend stood and talked while we dogs watched them, wondering why they didn't let us out in the yard to be with them. Suddenly I felt some excitement off Jacob. He spoke to his shoulder. 10-4, Unit 8 Kilo 6 responding, he said, while Amy ran over to the gate. Cammy jumped up. Ellie, Amy commanded, come. We were out of the yard and I was up in the truck in just moments. I found myself panting, picking up on Jacob's excitement. Something told me that whatever was happening, it was far more important than find Wally. 19. Jacob drove us to a large